How often does this happen to you? You're in a high-stakes conversation, maybe it's a meeting, could be a presentation, right?
Yeah.
And you need to get a complex idea across. And the words leave your mouth, maybe it's English, maybe your native language, doesn't matter. And you feel that immediate internal cringe.
Oh, yeah. That feeling.
You feel awkward, or worse, you get stuck in that loop of, oh, well, like, I think that the key point is this, specific thing, that sort of hesitation.
That anxiety-driven need to fill every single tiny gap of silence.
Yeah.
It happens to almost everyone, I think, regardless of how fluent they are.
It really does. It feels like your intelligence is being undermined, right?
Yeah.
Not by your ideas, which might be brilliant, but just by the anxiety of, well, how you're delivering them.
Exactly. And the default reaction is almost always the same. We assume, okay, I need to learn this huge list of advanced vocabulary, or I need to start using really fancy, complex idioms.
Right, to sound like that truly confident expert.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, our mission today is to completely flip that assumption on its head.
We've been doing a deep dive into the research psychology, linguistics, communication studies, really looking for strategies that reliably help you sound smarter, more confident, and maybe most importantly, more intentional.
And without having to memorize a single advanced word. That's the key takeaway.
That's the goal. And we found this really counterintuitive twist running through all the best research. It seems the secret to intellectual credibility, it's actually clarity and brevity.
That pivot is so essential. This whole deep dive, really, it's about recognizing that genuine intellectual impact, it doesn't come from showing off linguistically.
Right. No muscle flexing needed.
None. It comes from mastering structure and delivery. We found 6 really effective habits, and they almost all rely heavily on saying less, not more.
Saying less, okay.
Which allows the brilliance of your ideas to actually shine through without all that clutter, the nervous filler words or those super complicated sentences.
Okay, so let's dig in. Where do we start? Which one challenges our assumptions the most directly? Start right there. Strategy 1. We're calling it the simplicity intelligence paradox.
The simplicity intelligence paradox.
The core idea is just that. Simple, clear language makes you sound smarter, not dumber.
Which feels so wrong instinctively. My gut feeling, and I bet a lot of our listeners feel this too, is if I use a big multisyllabic word, utilize instead of use,
Right.
I automatically sound more intelligent.
And that instinct, it's incredibly common, but it's precisely what the academic research challenges. There's foundational work here coming out of Northwestern University, and it's deeply rooted in something called cognitive load theory.
Cognitive load theory. Okay, I've heard that term, but break it down for us. What's actually happening in the listener's brain, like moment to moment, when we choose that unnecessarily complicated word?
Okay, think of the brain, the human brain, as having pretty limited processing bandwidth, especially when listening. It's not like reading where you can pause and go back.
Right, it's coming at you in real time.
Exactly. So when you use overly complex vocabulary or unnecessarily long sentences or, loads of jargon, you force the listener's brain to spend significant energy just trying to decode the language itself.
Just figuring out the words.
Just figuring out the words. That effort, the mental work required just to decipher what you're saying, that is the cognitive load. And it's like a tax on their attention span.
Okay, so even if I just swap use for utilize, I've added maybe a tiny fraction of a second of decoding time. Seems small, but you're saying it adds up.
It adds up incredibly quickly across a whole thought or a whole presentation. And the consequence for your credibility, well, it's devastating.
How so?
Because when the listener's brain is busy dedicating its limited resources to wrestling with your complex language, it has far fewer resources left over to focus on the actual sophistication of your ideas, the thing you actually want them to notice.
I see. So they might be nodding, looking like they're getting it.
Right. They're nodding politely, but they're working so hard just to keep up with your vocabulary that they cannot truly appreciate or critically internalize the complexity of your actual message.
It's like you're creating a cognitive traffic jam.
That's a perfect way to put it.
If the listener is stuck focusing on the vehicle, my fancy words, they can't focus on the destination, my brilliant insight.
Precisely. So the huge advantage of being committed to simplicity, then, is that when you use short, active, clear sentences, the listener's brain can actually relax.
Okay.
The cognitive load just plummets. They understand you almost instantly, effortlessly. And because their brain isn't busy fighting your words, they can focus entirely on the depth of your thoughts. And here's the kicker. The result is often a cognitive error, but one that works in your favor.
How does that work?
The listener attributes the ease of understanding not to your simple language choice, but to your superior intelligence as the speaker. They think, wow, they explain that so clearly, they must really be smart.
That is a fundamental mind shift right there.
Yeah.
Okay, but let me push back slightly because I can hear some listeners wondering this. Does simplifying too much risk sounding, I don't know, condescending? Or maybe simplistic, especially if you're talking about really complex topics?
That's a really important distinction to make. We are absolutely not advocating for using, infantile language.
Right.
We're advocating for intentional clarity. The research is clear. The complexity should live in the idea, not in the delivery of the idea.
Okay.
A truly complex subject, when you articulate it simply, that actually demonstrates mastery. If you sound condescending, that's usually about your tone of voice, not your vocabulary choice.
Got it. Tone, not words.
Exactly. Think about the specific example given in the source material we looked at. The contrast is so stark. Why don't you read the unnecessarily complex phrasing first?
Okay, here's the complex one. And yeah, this sounds like it was written to hit a word count in some academic paper. The intricate interplay between linguistic proficiency and cognitive processing speed specifically influences the perceived intelligence of a speaker. Phew. I mean, I needed to take a breath just to get through that.
Right. It's exhausting just to hear it. And the poor listener is already fighting to keep up, trying to parse intricate interplay and linguistic proficiency.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with the clear phrasing. It conveys the exact same powerful idea, but with deliberate simplicity.
Okay, here's the clear version. The faster and clearer you speak, the smarter you sound because people focus on your ideas, not your words. Much punchier.
It's punchy, it's memorable, and it has immediate impact. The difference is undeniable, isn't it?
Totally. One makes the listener work hard, the other transfers the energy straight to the idea itself.
And critically, this isn't just some hack for English learners. This applies universally. Think about that famous analogy. It's often cited in these contexts.
Yeah.
If you truly understand a complex topic, you should be able to explain it to a 10-year-old.
Right. The Feynman technique, basically.
Exactly. If you can't distill it down, it probably means you're still hiding some gaps in your own understanding behind all that complexity.
That makes sense. True experts, the thought leaders who really command attention, whether they're scientists giving a TED Talk or business strategists, they tend to use simple, active language precisely because their ideas are so dense that simplify not because they have to, but as a sign of mastery.
They simplify out of mastery. So the takeaway here is, forget chasing the biggest words. We should be chasing relentless clarity.
Relentless clarity. I like that.
Exactly. And once we commit to that simplicity, the next huge hurdle, as we kind of touched on in the opening, is our anxiety around silence.
Ah, yes, the awkward pause.
Which leads us straight into strategy 2. Strategic silence is punctuation.
Okay, this strategy hits that internal panic button directly. So many of us have this deeply ingrained fear, don't we, that if we pause, even for like 1 second, we're going to look stupid or uncertain or like we lost our train of thought. So the impulse is just rush, 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 fill every gap with noise, anything.
And that panic, it's completely self-sabotaging. When you rush, you actually lose the chance to choose the best words. You start second-guessing yourself mid-sentence.
Oh, I've done that.
We all have. And it leads to grammatical errors, maybe tense confusion, you stumble over words. That frantic energy makes you sound far less credible than you actually are, regardless of how much you know about the topic.
So the irony is pretty deep then. The very thing you do to try and sound smart talking nonstop actually makes you sound kind of chaotic and unsure.
It's a profound irony. And the antidote is to actually embrace silence. Not as, an absence of sound, but as a deliberate tool, a tool of control.
Control? How so?
Pausing strategically is a powerful signal of confidence. It tells the listener, subconsciously maybe, that you are the one in charge of the conversation's tempo. You own the space.
And the research actually backs this up, right? It's not just a feeling. The studies you mentioned from Stanford, they showed a strong correlation.
A very strong correlation. Speakers who integrate these strategic pauses are consistently rated as more intelligent, more authoritative, and this is really interesting, more trustworthy than people who just talk nonstop.
More trustworthy. Why trustworthy? That seems like a leap.
It does at first, but think about the perception shift. When you pause deliberately, the listener doesn't interpret it as, oh no, they forgot the word.
Okay.
Instead, their brain perceives it as, they are thinking carefully about their next words.
I see. It implies consideration.
Exactly. It implies your words are measured, that they're selected with intention, and therefore they're grounded in deliberate thought. It suggests you're speaking because you have something genuinely worth hearing, not just filling the air.
That completely changes the dynamic. So the actionable trick here, the thing we need to practice, is understanding the difference between hesitation pausing because you genuinely lost your thought.
Right, the panic pause.
Yeah, the panic pause, versus pausing, like punctuation pausing after you make a point, or maybe right before a key phrase to give it more weight.
And knowing where to pause is crucial. You don't want to pause awkwardly mid-clause where the grammar needs to flow smoothly.
Right.
You pause before you deliver the conclusion of a major point, or pause right after a strong transitional phrase. And the pause doesn't need to be long. Often just, 1 or 2 seconds is plenty, but it has to feel intentional.
Can we try an example? Maybe contrasting a rushed delivery with a paused one.
Sure. Let's take a simple idea, like less is more. If I say it rushed, less is more. It just flies by.
Yeah, barely registered.
Now, if I say less is more.
Okay, yeah. That little silence, it forces you to consider the phrase. It lands differently.
That small silence, as the source material beautifully put it, is where your confidence lives. It's where your authority resides. If you make a strong point and then just stop cleanly, you compel the listener to contemplate what you just said. They have no choice but to absorb it.
That's powerful. And, as the sources we looked at highlight this is commitment to clarity and control. It shouldn't just stop with how we speak. It really needs to extend into the visual realm too, right? Especially in professional communication.
Oh, absolutely. If your goal is for your ideas to truly land effectively, you have to think about how those thoughts are presented visually. In your slide decks, your reports, even things like LinkedIn posts now.
Because the greatest threat to that simplicity paradox we talked about isn't just speaking in a complex way.
Exactly. It's presenting complexly, too. Think about how many people spend hours, maybe even days, battling with presentation software, agonizing over text alignment, font choices, way too many bullet points.
All that visual noise.
It's all visual noise. And it contributes directly to that cognitive load we discussed earlier. It creates visual clutter.
It's basically the visual equivalent of saying, and constantly. Too many elements, too many clashing colors, walls of text. It just overwhelms your audience before you even start talking.
And this is where the resources we reviewed pointed towards, well, the utility of tools that kind of embrace that minimalist aesthetic by automating the removal of that clutter.
Right. If you're spending weeks just trying to get one presentation looking polished, you're kind of missing the point of communication, which is the idea itself.
Precisely. The focus should be on the message. We saw AI-powered tools like Gamma mentioned quite a bit in this context.
Ah, okay. And how does that align with the simplicity strategy?
Well, the core function described fits perfectly. You basically drop in your raw content, your core ideas, maybe some research findings, even your script outline. And the system uses AI to transform it into a polished, visually clean, ready-to-share deck, often in minutes.
So it handles the design clutter for you.
It essentially applies that principle of saying less, but to visual design. It makes clarity the default setting, allowing you, the speaker or creator, to focus entirely on refining the message, not wrestling with design logistics.
That ability to just skip straight to a clean final version sounds like a huge productivity booster.
Massive. And they mentioned its versatility too, generating interactive documents, landing pages, social media carousels, all adapting to your style, AI-powered. It shows how this simplicity principle is being applied across all sorts of digital formats now.
Okay, that makes sense. So whether it's using strategic silence when you speak or maybe relying on a tool like AI to deliver visual simplicity, the core idea is the same. Minimize the noise, maximize the impact.
That's the through line.
All right, so we've got the foundation laid. Simplicity in language, embracing silence for control. Now let's get into some specific techniques that can instantly improve conversational flow, maybe make you sound more like a, seasoned native communicator.
Yes. Let's move into strategies 3 and 4. These are what we might call linguistic hacks.
Linguistic hacks. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's strategy 3?
Strategy 3 is a really powerful psychology-backed trick called syntactic priming.
Syntactic priming. Sounds a bit academic.
It sounds dense, but the concept itself is beautifully simple. And it's one of those things that highly fluent, really skilled communicators do all the time, probably without even realizing they're doing it or having a name for it.
Okay, so what is it? It's about echoing structure, you said, not just words. How does that play out in a real conversation?
Instead of just repeating the listener's specific words back to them, which can sometimes sound a bit robotic or unintelligent,
Right.
you subtly mirror their underlying sentence structure, the grammatical pattern, maybe the tense they used, or the overall phrasing back in your answer.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say a colleague asks you a fairly complex question using a specific structure. Maybe something like, given the market fluctuations we saw last quarter, do you believe the executive team's decision to pivot towards the Asian market was actually a viable strategy? It's a long opening clause setting context.
Okay, complex question structure.
Right. Now, a simple flat answer might just be, yeah, I think it was good, or yes, it was viable.
A bit blunt.
A bit blunt, and it doesn't show you fully engaged with the complexity of their question. But a smartly primed answer would mirror that initial structure back. Something like, based on those market fluctuations last quarter, I do believe the pivot towards the Asian market was a viable strategy, and here's why.
I see it now. You picked up the rhythm. The given X, do you believe Y was Z structure?
Exactly. You adopted the rhythm and the grammatical weight of their question in your answer.
And you said this takes zero effort.
Practically zero effort, because the framework is already provided for you by the other person. And in fact, it actually saves you mental energy because you don't have to formulate a completely brand new sentence structure from scratch while you're also trying to think of your answer's content.
Okay, that makes sense. Efficiency. But what's the psychological win you mentioned?
This is the really clever part. The listener's brain, subconsciously, registers that echoed structure as familiar. It creates this immediate, subtle feeling of connection and trust.
Connection and trust, just from mirroring
Yeah.
sentence structure.
It feels like, this person is tracking exactly where I'm coming from, or they're operating on the same wavelength. It smooths the interaction, reduces communication friction, and helps build rapport very quickly.
That trust mechanism sounds critical, especially in professional settings or negotiations. I feel like I've noticed this now. You pointed out watching skilled debaters or journalists interviewing someone, maybe politicians.
Oh, constantly. Or even just your favorite YouTubers, who seem really engaging. They're not just repeating keywords back, they're often mirroring the architecture of the conversation partner's speech.
It's a way to stay engaged, show you're listening closely, even while you're buying yourself that crucial half second to think.
Exactly. It signals engagement while simultaneously creating the mental space you need to deploy. Strategy 1. Choosing those simple, clear words for your actual answer.
Okay, syntactic priming, echoing structure, not just words. Got it. That flows really nicely into strategy 4, which you mentioned helps bridge delivery gaps.
Yes, strategy 4, micro-transitions. If priming helps with the structural connection between turns, micro-transitions help smooth out the flow within your own turn.
Right. This tackles the filler words head on.
This is absolutely critical because this is where most people, when they need a second to think, default straight back to those confidence-killing fillers.
Guilty as charged.
We all are. But what makes a conversation with a really smooth, competent speaker sound so good isn't that they never pause to think everyone needs a second now and then.
Okay.
It's that they replace those fillers with short, intentional, connecting phrases, micro-transitions.
And the difference in perception is huge, isn't it? When you hear, your brain registers it as, okay, they're stuck. They're struggling internally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mental freeze signal.
But when you hear a transition phrase instead, even a short one, your brain registers it as organization. They're moving logically to the next point.
Precisely. These micro-transitions keep the conversational engine running smoothly, even while you might be shifting gears mentally to find the next idea. They transform what could be perceived as hesitation into perceived structure.
Okay, so we need some examples. The research emphasized memorizing a few key ones.
Yes, definitely. Don't try to learn 50. Just internalize a small list of really versatile, effective phrases. These become like verbal scaffolding, holding your points together.
Let's list a few good ones people could start with, more than just the couple mentioned earlier, maybe.
Good idea. Think about having maybe 5 to 8 of these ready to go and rotate them until they become second nature. So instead of here's the thing, or what's interesting about this is,
Okay.
or perhaps the way I see this developing is, or to put that another way.
To put that another way is good for clarifying.
Very useful. Also, a crucial aspect here is, or the classic, for example, or maybe if we consider this point further, or thinking about consequences, the impact of that is.
Okay, that's a great toolkit. Let's illustrate the difference again. Instead of saying something like, I think clarity is really important, grammar is also, kind of important too, which sounds hesitant.
Right. Hesitant and a bit jumbled. Instead, use the bridge. Clarity is undeniably important. Now, here's the thing. While grammar certainly matters, clarity ultimately matters more for impact.
Much smoother. That little phrase. Now, here's the thing. It acts almost like a subtle reset button, both for you and for the listener. It sounds intentional, organized.
It frames what follows. The impact is that you sound like you are leading the conversation, guiding the listener, rather than just reacting hesitantly to the silence or your own thoughts.
These micro transitions ensure that even when you are pausing to gather your thoughts, you maintain that perception of flow and organization.
And that's the practical tip. Choose 5 or 6, drool them. Use them consciously in low-stakes conversations until they start replacing your habitual filler words automatically. They become your linguistic safety net.
Excellent. Okay, so strategy 1, simplicity. Strategy 2, strategic silence. Strategy 3, syntactic priming. Strategy 4, micro transitions. We've built quite a foundation for sounding clearer and more confident.
We have. And now we move into the final 2 strategies, which are arguably the most powerful for positioning your ideas and boosting credibility.
Right, strategies 5 and 6. Let's hear them.
Strategy 5 is contrast framing.
Yeah.
This technique, I think, is really the hallmark of sophisticated thinking made audible.
Contrast framing. Okay.
It moves your communication entirely beyond just simple statements of opinion. It acknowledges nuance. Smart communicators, really persuasive people, they don't just state their position, they position their opinion.
How do they position it?
By briefly acknowledging the other side, or alternatives or opposing viewpoints, before they articulate their own core point.
Ah, okay. So you're deliberately showing you see the bigger picture. This is how you escape that black and white thinking the sources mentioned.
Exactly. It immediately signals intellectual maturity. You're not presenting a simplistic one-sided view.
But what exactly does this framing achieve? You said it boosts credibility. How?
It pulls off 3 really powerful things simultaneously, often within just 1 or 2 sentences.
Okay, what are they?
First, by acknowledging the other side, it inherently signals intelligence because you're showing you understand nuance. The world isn't simple, and your thinking isn't either.
Right, signals complexity of thought.
Second, it demonstrates that you've actually considered alternatives. This shows respect for other potential opinions, and it implies you've done your homework. You didn't just jump to a conclusion.
Okay, signals diligence.
And third, by establishing those boundaries first, by saying it's not X, but it is Y, it makes your final core point, the why, sound infinitely more grounded, more thought through, and much more defensible.
Because you've already anticipated and kind of diffused the listener's likely mental counterargument before you even state your case.
Precisely. Let's really dive into an example here. Compare a flat statement in a business context versus a framed one.
Okay.
Imagine you're presenting to leadership and you just state flatly, I think this new budget allocation is a mistake.
Okay, sounds a bit confrontational, maybe. And very open to challenge. Why is it a mistake?
Exactly. It's a vulnerable statement of opinion. Now, listen to the framed version using contrast. I recognize that this new budget allocation seems to optimize our short-term profit margins quite well.
Okay, acknowledging the perceived benefit first.
But if we look at the potential impact on our long-term R&D growth, I believe the allocation is actually a strategic mistake that could stunt innovation down the line.
Wow, okay. The difference is huge.
Monumental, isn't it?
Yeah.
You haven't just stated your opinion. You've established the whole landscape of the discussion. You acknowledge the validity, or at least the logic, of the opposing view before asserting your own carefully considered position.
That sounds much more strategic, much less like just complaining. You hear this kind of framing everywhere once you start listening for it, right? Politicians, CEOs, academics.
Everywhere. High-level political debates, CEO communications during earnings calls, complex academic defenses. It's fundamental to persuasive communication.
And it works in basically any field. If we were talking about, say, technology, instead of just blurting out, AI is going to replace human writers.
Which sounds kind of alarmist in absolutes.
Right. Easily dismissed as hyperbole.
You could frame it. Look, I wouldn't necessarily say AI will replace every human writer entirely, but I think it will absolutely change how every human writer approaches things like first drafts and research.
Perfect example. Framing is everything. It allows you to maintain a strong, clear point while simultaneously demonstrating a sophisticated, nuanced understanding of the reality. It moves you past simplistic black and white statements.
So just by adding that little contrast at the start, it's not quite X, it's more like Y. Your idea instantly sounds more balanced, more credible, and yeah, more intelligent. And it prepares the listener to accept your core idea because you've already addressed, or at least acknowledged, their initial mental objection or the obvious alternative.
Okay, contrast framing. Super powerful. What's the sixth and final strategy?
Which brings us perfectly to our final strategy, number 6, the evidence light approach, or sometimes called evidential framing.
Evidence light. Does that mean using weak evidence?
Uh-huh. No, not at all. It complements contrast framing beautifully by adding a subtle layer of grounding to your opinions, showing where they come from, without needing, footnotes in a casual conversation.
Okay, so it's about making sure your opinions sound like they're based on something solid.
Exactly. We're not saying you need to cite formal academic studies every time you speak, but your beliefs, your conclusions, they need to sound like they're based on something tangible, maybe logic, direct observation, prior experience.
And not just, as the sources put it, vibes, or just repeating something you saw scroll past on social media.
Precisely. It's about avoiding the impression that your opinion just materialized out of thin air. Evidential framing is the subtle art of signaling that you are an observer, a thinker, someone who has actually been paying attention to the world around them.
You're providing the context for why you hold that belief.
Yes, you're giving it roots.
Okay, let's take another example. A general observation, maybe something like flexible work hours lead to better team outcomes. It's a claim, could be true, could be dismissed as just wishful thinking.
Right. It's a bit abstract, floats there unsupported. Now frame it evidentially. Based on what I've observed directly over the last 2 quarters here, the teams that have been given more control over their start and end times seem to have consistently outperformed their fixed schedule counterparts. At least that's been my experience watching the Project Velocity.
Okay, yeah. The second version is much more compelling. It's still an observation, but it's tethered to something concrete. Your experience, your observation over a specific period.
It instantly changes the perception. You've shifted from someone just sharing a broad, maybe generic claim to someone sharing a specific analyzed data point, even if that data point is simply your own carefully considered professional memory or observation.
It makes it sound earned.
Exactly. And this is often accomplished with really simple, short phrases that act as instant credibility shortcuts. They just signal thoughtfulness immediately.
What are some of those key phrases? The source material emphasize internalizing a few.
Yeah, things like, in my experience,
Mm-hmm.
or from what I've seen working in this field, or even appealing to logic, based on the internal logic of the situation, it seems that. Or maybe citing trends, according to the trends I've been tracking lately.
Simple phrases like, based on what I've read or what I've noticed is.
Exactly. These little frames show the listener you've actually done the internal work. You've processed reality, you've observed, you've connected dots, and your conclusion is therefore earned, not just plucked out of the air.
It transforms what might sound like a tentative guess into a much more grounded, informed perspective.
And when you start combining all 6 of these strategies, you're aiming for clarity and simplicity, you're using silence strategically, you're echoing structure with priming, smoothing things out with micro-transitions, positioning with contrast, and grounding with evidence.
You get this really powerful cumulative effect.
That's the ultimate goal. You're combining clarity, control, structure, and intellectual positioning. And notice in almost every single one of these steps, you're either simplifying your language or strategically utilizing silence. You're saying less, but communicating far more effectively.
That really is the complete research-backed toolkit then. We started this whole deep dive talking about that common anxiety-fueled desire to sound smarter by just cramming in more vocabulary. And we're ending up here with 6 core habits that focus almost entirely on structure, on intentionality, and on the strategic power of saying less.
The shift is pretty fundamental, isn't it? And hopefully empowering for listeners. Sounding more intelligent and confident, it turns out, isn't really about the sheer volume of your vocabulary list.
No.
It's about the quality and the intentionality of your communication. Mastering that simplicity, using silence to signal control, employing those subtle linguistic hacks like priming and transitions, and really positioning your ideas thoughtfully through contrast and evidential framing.
It really boils down to communicating not just fluently maybe, but much more intentionally.
Indeed. Which leaves us with just one final provocative thought for you, the listener, to perhaps explore on your own as you start trying to incorporate some of these shifts.
Okay.
If confidence truly lives in that strategic silence, and if perceived intelligence is so strongly signaled by simplicity and clarity, then what everyday communication habits are we still holding on to? Maybe those rushed sentences, those excessive filler words we talked about, perhaps that deep-seated fear of pausing that might be unknowingly sabotaging the clarity and ultimately the impact of our most important ideas.